BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. And the first thing to say, as always, if you like this upload, you can hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed yet, you're welcome to do so. But most importantly, please drop some comments below at the end so we can continue the discussion. And this show now has an Instagram page, BlackBoxNed88. One more time, BlackBoxNed88. And if you follow the show on Instagram, you'll get access to a special bonus podcast talking about music, movies, daily life, and more. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram. So, there is this documentary out there called This Is the Zodiac Speaking. It is available on YouTube on a couple different channels. One of them is Tom Voigt's own channel, and another one is called Pedro Bosox, giving a big shout out to YouTube user Pedro Bosox. And at first, when I saw Bo Sox, I thought, is there any chance that this is a tribute to the Bowie Bay Sox baseball team, much closer to me here in West Virginia? No, but Bo Sox, of course, for Boston. I digress from that because I just wanted to say that this is a 1 hour and 40-minute documentary that you can see online for free, and we're going to be discussing some of the content that is available in it. And this is not a traditional documentary review or film review. If you haven't seen that, feel free to keep listening. We're just going to be talking about the Zodiac Killer. I had known that this thing was online for a while, and I had wanted to just sit down one day, watch the whole thing straight, not in any segments, and then we would talk about some of the material and the claims that were made in this documentary about the Zodiac Killer. Now, the first thing that I can say is this is one of the special feature documentaries that was included in the DVD for David Fincher's 2007 film Zodiac. There's another one called His Name Was Arthur Lee Allen, and last year in 2019, we did a two-part response to that one. But right now, we're going to be talking about This Is the Zodiac Speaking. A lot of people were really praising this one because they were saying they liked how it went step by step, talking about each incident and confirmed Zodiac activity, as well as some of the different features of the murders that happened in 1968 and 1969. So, to begin, of course, we have December 20th, 1968, the murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. But I thought that this film really added a lot when they began discussing Blue Rock Springs and the murder of Darlene Ferrin, as well as the shooting of Mike Mageau. And Mike Mageau was featured in the documentary. And this is one of the things where you just get to hear an eyewitness account of someone who is dealing with the Zodiac. First and foremost, he says that when Darlene Ferrin spoke to this person, she used the name Richard. That name was uttered during one of their exchanges. In previous material, Mike Mageau has also said that Darlene Ferrin was called by her nickname, D, by whoever this person was. And another point that they brought up was that when Mike Mageau was shot and Darlene Ferrin was murdered, it was the 4th of July, right? Mike Mageau was wearing 3 layers of clothing, and a couple of explanations have been provided for this. I would have to say, first and foremost, when people always talked about Mike Mageau wearing 3 layers of clothing on the 4th of July, I imagined that just simply meant 3 shirts. But in addition to that, he was also wearing 3 layers of pants, like wearing 3 different pairs of pants. I'm guessing one of them was probably shorts, but not necessarily sure. So he's wearing 3 layers of clothing, both shirts and bottoms. And the explanation that he provided for this was that he was very skinny, and he was indeed on a date with Darlene Ferrin. And even though Darlene Ferrin was married, he was on a date with her, and he just felt very shy about his skinniness, so he was wearing 3 layers of clothing to look bigger. And then someone left a comment in the comments section, "Oh, poor Mike Mageau, he's so insecure." And I was, of course, reminded of something that I heard on the Stones Unturned podcast, and I even saw the YouTube channel, the Stones Unturned podcast, responded to that person saying, "Oh no, poor Mike Mageau, he's so insecure," saying, no, he wasn't insecure. That is a downright lie, or not. It is not the truth. To be a little bit more polite, I mean, the guy was the victim in this. It was just not truthful. Mike Mageau was a petty criminal. He was a burglar. He was wearing 3 layers of clothing. And this is coming from the Stones Unturned responding to this person's comment. He's wearing 3 layers of clothing because he could sneak into somebody's house, snatch a few items, maybe a radio, maybe some valuables, throw them in a pillowcase, run out the window, and anytime he turns the corner, he can shed a different layer of clothing, and witness descriptions would be all confused. That was the reason why Mike Mageau was wearing the 3 layers of clothing. But it's the first time I heard that he was trying to cover up his skinniness. What does this mean? It sounds like it means that Mike Mageau is simply becoming an unreliable witness. And this whole thing about a Richard, did that really happen? I don't know about that. I mean, if he's fabricating certain details about why if he's starting to become unreliable, then that's just one thing in itself. But we do have something in the 1990s where Mike Mageau was interviewed unknowingly by Darlene Ferrin's sister, Pam. You want to talk about unreliable witnesses? Pam Huckabee went to visit Mike Mageau, and there's a camera crew that's following from a distance, and they're recording that, and he's just refusing to talk about the murder of Darlene Ferrin. The whole point is, it seems like Mike Mageau is somewhat of an unreliable witness, and a motivation for that could be very simple, that he was trying not to do something that would anger an individual named Donald Warren Porter, who was a local criminal who would definitely be involved with things like buying stolen goods and a host of criminal activities. And Donald Warren Porter does not match any of the physical descriptions of the person seen at the park, talking about how someone could be around 5'8". That's one of the things we heard, maybe 5'9", 5'10". And this is the guy that I think is where we get the descriptions of someone who is beefy, but not fat or blubbery. But Donald Warren Porter was 6'7", and it's also possible that Jim Phillips Crabtree was present at the murder of Darlene Ferrin. And the hoax theory response to that is that it was a sting operation that went wrong. Darlene Ferrin was actually trying to set up her ex-husband, Jim Phillips Crabtree, but the plan backfired, and Donald Warren Porter fired bullets on Mike Mageau and Darlene Ferrin, possibly Crabtree, though. It's really hard to speculate with that stuff because, it's 51 years ago now. It is hard to speculate with that stuff. But the whole point is, Mike Mageau is sharing a lot of things, and he seems like he's very sure of himself. However, you'd think 40 years later at the time of that recording, you wouldn't want to say, I was trying to steal something and I was shedding a layer of clothes. No one would care if he admitted that he was trying to steal somebody's radio 40 years ago, if he just came forward and said it. But I mean, that is there all the same. Another point that was mentioned is in the Lake Berryessa stabbing. We're now going from July 4th to September 27th of 1969, involving Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Ann Shepard. Once again, to the credit of this documentary, this is the Zodiac speaking. They had Brian Hartnell interviewed in this film. I would never have recognized him. I mean, he looked absolutely different. I mean, granted, it had been, as we said, about 40 years later, but I mean, he looked like a totally different person. Mike Mageau, I could definitely tell that that's still the same person that was featured in the documentary. Lake Berryessa is the only time that the Zodiac Killer wore a hood. The only time that the Zodiac Killer had the symbol on his chest. The only time the Zodiac had a long, drawn-out conversation. Because at Blue Rock Springs, it's just a few words. Apparently the name D was said, the name Richard was said, and maybe some other things, and there are a few bullets flying. Mike Mageau says he got to look at the perpetrator's face, but at Lake Berryessa, you have the Zodiac Killer having a full-on, multi-minute conversation with Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Ann Shepard. And with that one, what I can say about that is their descriptions of this is that Cecilia Shepard got a look at the perpetrator while he was putting on the Zodiac Killer hood, and they even asked this question in the documentary. Why would somebody wear a hood if he was going to stab the victims to death? And it's like, well, that's a very good question. We've talked about it a lot on this channel. I mean, the big motivation that I first thought of was, if Mike Mageau survived Blue Rock Springs, well, maybe someone else would be able to survive this one, and they would identify the Zodiac, so he wasn't trying to take fewer chances by stalking a lover's lane. The second one is, Lake Berryessa was the only time that something happened during the daytime. All other incidents in Zodiac activity happened at night, whether it's Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, and Paul Stein's murder in Presidio Heights, as well as the other alleged incidents, the Kathleen Johns incident and the murder of Sherry Jo Bates. Those all happened at night. Lake Berryessa happened when the sun was still out, and the Zodiac even signed the car door, writing the symbol and writing the dates of Zodiac activity, Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, and then Lake Berryessa, 9/27, and 6:30 p.m. as the murder concluded. So we have Very, very different things at Lake Berryessa. Writing messages on the car door. The perpetrator could have had ample opportunity to do something like that at Blue Rock Springs, as well as wearing a hood, switching from a handgun to using a knife, although the Zodiac did have a handgun at Lake Berryessa. Those things are very abnormal in the true crime world. And some people go down the hoax theory, the multiple killers theory, and then some people just simply say, this guy was trying to be different in an effort to confuse the police. I will also say, though, that the Zodiac did write "by knife" on the door after listing all of those incidents in Zodiac activity, as well as the Zodiac symbol, the circle with the cross going through it. The words "by knife" were written on the door. And through research, I first heard about it from Drew Beeson, but this has been tracked down to something called The Wheel of Death from a comic series called Tim Holt, which I believe was actually a Western comic series. I'm actually going to try and purchase some of these things. I would just like to read them, not even connected to the Zodiac Killer. I'm curious what's in them for myself. Like you, I'm sure you probably had some fascination with comic books at some point in your life. But the thing is, it's like, there's this thing called the Wheel of Death that says by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire. And one of the possible solutions to the 3-4 cipher is by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire. This comes up very frequently. It was also mentioned on I believe it was the Halloween card that was sent to Paul Avery in 1970 when his name is misspelled Averly, and it has a particular symbol in the corner. And there are a variety of explanations about what people would have to say about that. And it comes in heavily with the Donald Lee Booyock theory, as well as perhaps some other people. But the whole point is this the beginnings and the foundations of a thrill kill club, a serial killer cult, something to that effect, or the occult rituals? Lake Berryessa is one of the things that people really point to and look, it's possible that there was some type of occult ritual going on with the Zodiac Killer, because the Zodiac symbol that the person was wearing on the hood was something that really looked like Aleister Crowley's cross that he used in some of his satanic rituals, practices, and public appearances. Although a lot of things happen with Aleister Crowley that, I mean, it's highly possible that Aleister Crowley was just trying to make a name for himself and wasn't necessarily as devout of a believer in the Church of Satan or satanic practices, Satanism, as he made people think. But we're going to have to talk about that in a future upload. So what I would say about this is, when it comes to Lake Berryessa, another thing that really stands out to me that was included in this documentary, this is the Zodiac Speaking, is that Cecilia Ann Shepard survived. And she passed away 2 days later. But when I say she survived the stabbing, means that the paramedics were able to get her to the hospital, although I believe they had to wait for an extremely long time before the ambulance would come. They even had to wrap Cecilia in a jacket from one of the park rangers or something like that. A very long time, very abnormally long time for the paramedics to get there. But she passed away 2 days later in the hospital. So first and foremost, not my own original observation, but somebody who had medical knowledge was most likely not the perpetrator at Lake Berryessa. Any of the suspects who are doctors or medics, things like that, are most likely not the perpetrator, because they would have had a greater knowledge about how to end the life of Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Ann Shepard. So with this one, you can see very clearly that this is a bizarre incident. But the thing that I wanted to say was, Cecilia Shepard said that she was talking about a suspect who was much taller than 5'8", 5'9", 5'10", and they were measuring the height of another detective who was about 5 feet 10 inches tall, and she's like, he is taller, maybe around 6 feet or 6'2". And this was also when they really had the descriptions of a barrel-chested individual. Now, I gotta say, the Zodiac was wearing the costume at Lake Berryessa. That must have affected and altered the perceptions of his appearance, because I was looking back at an old photo from last winter. I was getting ready for a football game, and I had this tank top that had the football team's logo on it, and I put it on over a sweater that I was wearing because it's the winter time. Bear in mind, the Zodiac was wearing this all on September 27th, mind you. Must have been extremely hot for California. I mean, but I digress from that. And I was just looking at that photo myself, and I look so much bigger wearing this tank top with the logo on it. on top of a sweater. I mean, I look so much bulkier than I normally do. I'm not a bulky guy, but I did look like it in that photo. And the costume probably really distorted their perceptions of the Zodiac Killer and their ability to describe what he looked like. I'm sure they're saying that this is some guy that is much bigger than he actually was. Not to mention that they're like, why even wear a hood? And one of the final answers to say is simply just that the Zodiac Killer was trying to terrorize people. This was actually one of the things that I saw in the comment section. Don't have it in front of me or else I'd give the person a shout out, but it's an insightful observation. The Zodiac was trying to terrorize people. He was trying to drive fear into the people that he was talking to. He wanted them to be in a state of fear, panic, or just in one of those moments that is so bizarre that they aren't going to know how to respond. He was wearing the hood because it looked terrifying. He's talking about escaping from Deer Lodge Prison because it got them to comply with his orders. And that's one of the few observations that I thank Gary Stewart for. Meaning that while it's possible there could be a Montana connection, maybe there is not. And maybe that this person was just saying that I escaped from Deer Lodge Prison in Montana because it was what he had to say to get the victims to go along with his orders. But aside from that, when you look at some of the other incidents in Zodiac activity, including the Paul Stein murder in Presidio Heights, you really see that there's that whole thing is there the APB is going out for a black man when in reality they're looking for a Caucasian. Whose fault was it? Overwhelmingly, when I was looking at what everybody had to say about this documentary, this is the Zodiac Speaking, people were saying the investigation was messed up and screwed up and bungled, and people had really done some critical errors in the Zodiac case, and they believe that the only reason, and this overwhelmingly amount of people are saying that the only reason the Zodiac was never cracked, the case was never cracked, because of police errors. I would just like to say that it's highly possible that all of that is true. And, well, we have to look at it this way. The second upload I ever did on this channel was talking about how when you want to look at conspiracy theories that are true, a conspiracy, two or more people hiding the truth, usually for a malicious reason, overwhelmingly it seems that the conspiracy theories that we have found that happen to be true are when not only police but administrations commit errors in their investigations, and they use their administrative power to cover up the errors that they've made, mostly because they don't want to lose face, they don't want embarrassment, or they just want to hide their mistakes. Lots of people would want to do that, but when you're dealing with things like police departments or the FBI or the ATF, you're dealing with organizations like that, it is very difficult for them to expose those things to the public, and that's going to open up a can of worms for them. But this is very possible that critical errors were committed by the police in investigating this. Certain things weren't followed up, certain people weren't looked into, and that is why these crimes were able to have taken place. We've talked a lot about the Zodiac Killer hoax theory on this channel, as well as the possibility of an individual named Don Chaney being the Zodiac Killer. And one of the points that they really wanted to hunker down on in this documentary, this is the Zodiac Speaking, was that wing walker boots were left at the scene at Lake Berryessa. Not just military boot prints, wing walker boot prints. And the kind of, when they say wing walker, they mean the thing that someone would use in the Air Force if they were standing on the wing of a plane. And these things were sold in surplus stores. We have heard that in the Louis Myers theory, that other people could have had access to them. I mean, Ross Sullivan regularly wore military-style boots just because he liked them. But Don Chaney apparently has an Air Force connection, as well as an individual named Hal Snook, who also was in the Air Force as well. And I believe he was stationed at both Tachikawa Air Force Base and, not yet Lowry Air Force Base. We're trying to find that out. But to digress from that, what we can say is that there are a lot of people really think that the Zodiac Killer had some connection to the Air Force. And this is even mentioned in Gareth Penn's Radian theory about how Lake Berryessa is equidistant from Mount Diablo, as is Travis Air Force Base. But to talk about some material from the documentary, this is the Zodiac Speaking, Gareth Penn's entire theory was on times 17. He believed that that was like a coded name for the Zodiac Killer, and the number 17 was very important. And the victims at Lake Berryessa were stabbed 17 times, 10 for Cecilia Ann Shepard, 7 for Brian Hartnell. Brian Hartnell said in the documentary with his own words that he was stabbed 6 times. So that's a wrench in that. He seemed like he was trying to remember those, so he wasn't 100% sure. But one of the reasons why Cecilia Ann Shepard was stabbed more than Brian Hartnell was, she was stabbed second. I mean, this is just my own response. They're saying that the Zodiac has Cecilia Ann Shepard and Brian Hartnell tied up at Lake Berryessa. First, he stabs Brian Hartnell, then he stabs Cecilia Ann Shepard. I have never murdered anyone. I have never stabbed anyone. But what I can say is, I hear about this stuff in true crime, and people often get a burst of adrenaline when they're committing a murder like that, especially if they do not do it frequently, they're not doing it every day, they're not a professional hitman or something like that. So it's possible that the Zodiac Killer, the person wearing the costume at Lake Berryessa, stabbed Brian Hartnell at first 6 or 7 times. Then when he began to stab Cecilia Ann Shepard, he had a bigger fit of hyper activity and adrenaline and just rage even, perhaps. So that could be one of the reasons why she was stabbed more times than he was. He stabbed Brian Hartnell first to render him useless, and then stabbed Cecilia Ann Shepard, and the adrenaline had taken over. And it's only 3 more stab wounds, but everybody always points out that Cecilia was stabbed more than Brian was. Is that something to say that the Zodiac Killer really had animosity toward women, or is that simply saying that he was just a burst of adrenaline? Well, that's where we're going to have to leave it at for now. We've talked about some new things in the Zodiac Killer mystery with this one, as well as some possible meanings of the symbols, or possible clues, as well as some of the psychological things. What really was the Zodiac's intentions at Lake Berryessa and at Blue Rock Springs, and the reliability of witnesses in comparison and contrasting to that of the writers. If you have anything you'd like to contribute, this was just meant to throw off some notes and ideas about the Zodiac Killer. I would love to hear your responses in the section below, and you can hit that like button one more time. It really helps out the channel, and I will see you guys on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.